My name's Amber Baldet. I'm co-founder and CEO of Clovyr. Patrick Nielsen here is my co-founder and our CTO. And it was fantastic to hear this conversation with Dan as well. I mean, we're friends, and it's fun to kind of go out to dinner with this group and argue about a bunch of things. So it's great that you get to hear a bit of that conversation. And I mean, how many people here have gone to a program or a talk about enterprise blockchain at some point? Show of hands. This is many hands. How many people are kind of tired of hearing about the difference between permissioned and public blockchains and a blockchain 101 and when your use case should use blockchain? Many. Let the record show that's like many people. And so I thought that this was an interesting conversation to kind of help to get shaped because we're not just talking about what is the use case that sits on top of some theoretical magical protocol, but we're talking about some of the underlying principles that are very useful and have challenges, each of them individually at different layers of the stack. And what is it when we say, and we were all at dinner with Rob and Gab and things saying, like, let's not call it a blockchain working group. Why is it a decentralized ecosystem growth program? I know it's a mouthful, but that's because what we're working on here is about helping people build applications and networks that solve their challenges, whether you are a large investment bank, whether you are a startup in the fintech space. Increasingly, if you're building the types of decentralized applications that Dan mentioned at the end, and I believe, hopefully, even if you're building things that don't sit on top of a blockchain, but are trying to do something important like challenge some of the centralized business models that have made our internet and our commerce and our politics start to look the way that they have looked. It's all connected in some way, and we're solving these kind of challenges together. So I'm going to talk very briefly today, I guess, at this point. But so welcome to open finance, right? Like, let's not talk about enterprise blockchain for a second. But rather, let's recognize that cryptocurrency is decentralizing the issuance, storage, and safety of things that look like money, or maybe securities, or maybe commodities, maybe cash. But cryptocurrency does not automatically give people alternatives to traditional financial products or change the underlying reasons that they seek out financial services. So what are the problems that we're addressing here? Well, someone still needs a home loan. They would like to acquire something and they do not have the full purchase price. That's a problem that we can solve in many different ways. Perhaps I want to sell my art around the world. I need to be able to find the people who would like my product. I need to be able to accept payment, and I need to get something to them. And there needs to be some kind of dispute resolution process in the case that perhaps some part of that supply chain fails. Or maybe I want to invest in early stage companies. There are a lot of barriers around that globally, and even within the US. It's very hard to find deals. Normal people don't use words like deal flow. So how do you manage to access and invest in these things? And really, what we're saying is that when people talk about open finance, or kind of its analog a little bit now of DeFi or decentralized finance, what they're talking about is increasing access and removing gatekeepers to financial processes. And so institutionally, within the retail market, we're kind of calling this unbundling of services for a while. But this even goes beyond the concept of unbundling to talk about much more really disruptive forces where it's not just a new startup that's providing the centralized solution that unpicks one product from your traditional retail bundle, but rather it's what if we could create this as a collective commons, or even, as Dan alluded to at the end, a fully decentralized autonomous organization that doesn't necessarily need any of the rest of this infrastructure. A lot of those things are very far reaches, and the point is we have not solved those challenges at the bottom of the stack about, if I want to go get a loan, it has to be based off of some kind of concept of credit. There's plenty of data saying that people's credit score number is not actually a very good indicator of their willingness to repay the loan. The problem that we're solving here is not let's get a better credit number, but it's let's find out how we can make sure that this loan is going to get repaid. And that we don't have defaults, right? So some new solutions to that challenge might be, well, let's scrape people's social data profiles. Let's get as much data about them as we can from as many different places, not just their financial dealings. And now we're kind of moving towards this surveillance capitalism kind of stuff that is starting to see more, we're seeing more negative reaction to products based around that in the marketplace. And so a lot of what open finance is looking at on the retail side right now is what are the alternatives that we could have that foster consent amongst the user base, that make people happy to want to engage, and that allow us to challenge some of the status quo business models. It's not really something that matters if what you're worried about is, reducing the operational costs of your post-trade workflows. But the technology that is coming out of it, we can see this kind of bleed up the ecosystem, because we really don't want to simply have B2B institutional flows and then C2C over here, but rather there is actually a kind of global financial network that should be more connected. And so by learning from what's happening out on the bleeding edges of quote unquote DeFi, we can kind of pick up on what's working and see how we can be creating some new types of products and new types of designs and business models on top of this technology. So it's just a slightly different approach from sitting down and saying, like, we've evaluated every single line of business that we have, and here's our quad graph, and these are the areas where we have the most opportunity based on our market penetration, and these are the areas where we have the most likelihood for impact based on market concentration. And I did used to run the blockchain program at JP Morgan, just to be clear. So I know that there's a lot that goes into institutional use case discovery, but it's very easy to get kind of caught into this silo of thinking that only what we do matters within institutions, and there really is this kind of other stuff happening. And FINOS is a really interesting organization in that it's bringing together these large institutions, but it's also a completely open space for a lot of startups and even individuals that want to contribute to open source to get together and have conversations without a very heavy legal framework around that. And so what we'd like to foster here is an ability to kind of learn from each other in that way, but to Patrick's point earlier, create discrete usable tools that maybe are applicable both in a small business, but also turn out that they solve a similar problem in a very large enterprise. Everyone has logging challenges. And it's my personal belief that a lot of the early pilots that got 10 or 15 institutions around a table with a bunch of lawyers are not actually going to go very far. Instead, we need to start as a single organization and then move to multiplayer when we can. So open protocols reduce vendor stickiness, open source applications increase transparency, and even partially open source applications let you focus on your secret sauce layers. I think we've covered pretty much all of this. Here are some of these kind of different decentralized elements that help you challenge the status quo. So it's not about getting to the point of saying, we're decentralized now, but rather thinking that decentralization is a process and a thing that you can use at different pieces of your application architecture where it solves something useful. Okay? So you can see the multi-party computation over there, as was mentioned earlier. And this quote was actually in a blog that I read today. I thought it was a wonderful sentiment that was applicable. So we should care less about whether or not something is centralized or decentralized than whether or not it is accountable. An accountable system is responsive to both the common good for participants and the needs of minorities. In this case, we're talking about minority shareholders. And it sets consistent rules and can change them when they don't meet users' needs. So again, not decentralization for decentralization's sake. And then I think these slides are available if you want to kind of dig into this, but the Weber next is what we like to call Web 3 or / the Decentralized Web at Clovyr. This is how we think through the actual architecture stack, and that you should be able to map something like BitTorrent onto this as easily as you could map something like an enterprise blockchain use case. And that's not, it's not about selling a particular protocol or a particular vertically integrated stack, but about letting people build applications that do useful things. Okay, that's where we are. And so finally, this Decentralized Ecosystem Growth Program, we're focusing on building real tools. So things that make decentralized finance work for banks, businesses, regulators, clients, and customers. Thinking differently, so identifying some of these challenges like we've discussed tonight, but not just kind of trying to hit them with the same hammer or the same kind of PowerPoint. Hopefully getting people that have different perspectives in the room. And again, building community around that. So creating space for diverse perspectives and actually releasing some code here. And then this is on the website now, which Rob so wonderfully kind of helped us get up over the last week. But we're investigating specific problems. Feel free to take a look, and if you're interested in any of these challenges, there's a listserv you can join. But looking at the interactions between different types of central bank digital currencies, stablecoins, public cryptocurrency, traditional banking payment rails, there's a lot going on there. But understanding or hoping that maybe not one will win, but we will have an internet of value that crosses several. Understanding, again, the replication of pre, on, and post-trade workflows, how those might be translated into some smart contract things where necessary. Data models and crossing with some of the other FINOS groups, working on standard data models to make sure that you can deliver something into one of these new decentralized ecosystems just as you could a traditional one. Data confidentiality, privacy design, zero-knowledge systems. Always fun. Data oracles, so there's a huge issue with handling replicated data and data oracles, which are agreed upon, sources of truth into these systems, especially when you're pulling something from a commercial market data provider that has legal and commercial restrictions around the resale of that data. So working on authentication and access there. And then system migration and integration. I think it was a great question asked earlier about how the heck do we move to this stuff. So, working on some of the tooling around that. So that was a very speedy review. But
Great.
yeah, thank you so much for having us tonight.
Thank you.